You are Locked On Braves POSTCAST, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the Braves POSTCAST, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Grant McAuley alongside Jake Mastroianni after a very big day at the ballpark, big day at the plate for the Braves as they were able to pick up a lopsided win in a slugfest up in Cincinnati as they beat the Reds 15-3 to polish off a series victory and get themselves on the jet to head down to Miami for their final stop on their final road trip of the season. But they can't let off the gas. They've got to keep this thing going as they've got a date with the New York Mets next week. But we've got a lot to talk about as far as the series finale in Cincinnati goes, and, of course, getting you set up for that Marlins series, and we'll do it here on this edition of the Braves POSTCAST. Before we get started, hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to Locked On Sports Atlanta on YouTube, and Locked On Braves, wherever you get your podcasts. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, and now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started there. Well, Jake, a year ago, a 15-3 game, that was something that we probably talked about maybe a dozen or so times. At least it felt like it. Games like this. But here in 2024, it's a lot more rare. But a season-high 15 runs for the Braves, 5 home runs on the day, and that guy Chris Sale was also doing some work on the mound. It all added up to a must-win game for the Braves because at this point, as we know, they're all must-win games for the Braves.
They are. You got to win. You're not getting much help anywhere else, but you still control your own destiny because of those games with the Mets. But you're going to have to keep winning, and they want to keep winning like this. That is certainly fine. For the first time all year, I had the feeling of 2023 with the win that they had on Thursday and just how they got it done.
Yeah, it's got to be the first time since at least April in terms of like this offense just feeling like it could click. And that was at a time in which you didn't know what was ahead because at least most of the offense, save maybe Sean Murphy, was still around for the first month of the season when things felt altogether different. But putting all of that aside, I mean, this is exactly the kind of game that the Braves offense, I think, needed up in Cincinnati to carry some momentum over. Didn't know it might be as big of a lopsided score as it was, but you'll take it. As you mentioned, 15 runs the season high for the Braves, who hit 5 home runs in this game, 6 home runs in this game, multi-homer games from Michael Harris II and Matt Olson. Jorge Soler and Ramon Laureano also homered in this one. We talked about Matt Olson some yesterday and the way that he's been swinging the bat. If he has found something and has gotten himself locked in, he couldn't have come at a better time, and it looks like he might have some company in that department.
Yeah, we talked about it. A couple of guys top of the order yesterday who seem to be coming around. Soler, one of those, and Michael Harris, a big game. Matt Olson, as we discussed, and it's a guy for since the month and a half now, since the end of July, has been really, really good, especially with the doubles and the home runs. And seeing it in this one, I thought was impressive. In this one is you had a righty throwing a front door 2-seamer to him, and he was able to just sit on that. I mean, it was perfectly placed inside a pitch that he's had trouble getting to at times, and he's able to pull the hands in and drive that ball out to right field. Also, he just loves hitting in that ballpark. I mean, the Reds will probably be giving up whatever they can to try to get Matt Olson from the Braves because he just absolutely destroys baseballs there, as a lot of good power hitters do. But certainly Matt Olson loves hitting in Great American Small Park there.
Yeah, no, he certainly does. And that ballpark has earned that small park reputation because a lot of offenses have gone in there and gotten healthy. And it does look like, for whatever factors you want to throw into it, that one's got to be in the discussion as far as the Braves maybe getting a little healthier at the plate with some big cuts up there and some home runs, obviously, which never hurt the Braves' chances of winning. And it seems like a lot of times we talk about how this offense needs to hit the home runs or it's not going to be able to win a ball game because some of the other things hadn't been happening. When they are hitting the home runs, you don't really have to have that much of a discussion. It's just been, different timing, a lot more solo home runs, it feels like this year. And just not coming at the key times in which the Braves would very much like them, and maybe being a little bit too reliant on trying to make some things happen has all been part of the mix for what's not been going right for this Braves offense. None of that were things that we were watching on Thursday afternoon, though. All of that offense, more than enough for Chris Sale, who was grinding his way through 5 innings. Not his greatest start of the year, but I think just another example, Jake, of what Chris Sale is able to do. Very few offenses are able to touch, even on a day in which he may not have even had his best stuff or his best command. He simply found a way to make it happen, and that just lets you know Chris Sale is one of the best that's doing it right now in the big leagues.
He is. Again, even when he admitted it wasn't feeling his best, fastball wasn't feeling good for him. He's still able to go 5 innings, give up just 2 earned runs in that ballpark that we talked about, and still strike out over a batter inning. Only allowed 3 hard hit balls in this game. So it's just, it's incredible the season that he's had, and games like this where doesn't even really, you can just tell he's grinding, trying to get through it just to get through 5 innings to qualify for that win. A bit of travesty if he didn't. He finally got a ton of run support. For him to not get the win certainly would have felt bad, but he is able to get through that 5th inning and just continue on this pace of what looks like it's going to be a Cy Young season.
Yeah, I mean, he's making a case, and we'll talk about this later, as maybe the best pitcher in baseball this year, and you can probably remove the maybe from that statement because I believe that he is. It's a short list anyway. And putting all that aside, Chris Sale, another thing that was going right for the Braves in this game with 5 innings of 2-run ball to pick up a career-high 18th victory as well. And again, we'll get into Chris Sale's start in just a little bit, but as we talked about it, maybe the overarching thing here, we can talk about offense, we can talk about Chris Sale, we can talk about a big win, all of those things. The Braves had to have this series, Jake, and they were so close to a sweep. Obviously, the misstep in the opener of this series is one that you have to put in the back of your mind as far back as you can anyway. And the Braves were able to show some resiliency, bouncing right back into the win column with yesterday's game and then finishing it off with that series victory up in Cincinnati. But any missed opportunities at this point on are going to feel even bigger and even more magnified because you've got to look at the kind of success that the Mets continue to have and the fact that they're finding ways to do it without one of their big players in the lineup as well, a guy who is fighting for the MVP in Francisco Lindor.
Yeah, I mean, we say you have to win every game. They almost do. You put yourself in this hole that you really do have to win all of these games down the stretch. You just cannot afford to fall any further behind right now. You've got yourselves 2 games out because of losses like they had against the Reds and all the other bad losses they've had against teams this year they should have beaten that we've talked about way too much. But that's what put them in this spot where now in these last 2 weeks, you pretty much have to win every single game. You cannot afford really any more losses. And after what happened, to begin this week, you lose to the Dodgers on Monday, okay, they're obviously a really good team. So they did to the Marlins on Thursday. Yeah. And then you go and lose that game to the Reds, and it's just, you feel like, can they bounce back from this? And they did. And look, if you would have said coming into these 2 series with the Reds and the Marlins, 6 games, they really needed to go 5-1 in that, there's still an opportunity for that. But when you lose the first game of that 6-game stretch, it obviously makes it that much tougher. But to be able to bounce back, win the next 2 games and win them in the fashion that they did, I think speaks volumes to this team and their ability to be able to bounce back. But obviously got a lot of work left to do and almost no room for error.
Yeah, as we talked about, the Braves' longest win streak this year is 6 games. So when you do lose the first of a 6-game road trip and think, all right, well, now you got to win 5 in a row, winning streaks that are approaching that level have been few and far between for the Braves. They have swung some wild pendulums, back and forth, or the pendulum has swung to the extremes of losing 6 games in a row and then winning 5 out of 6 or 6 out of 7, whatever it may be, to get back on track. But all of that seems to just come back and forth and leave the Braves in that kind of neutral position as a 500 ball club that they have been pretty much since the 1st of May. But they've got to be a better than 500 ball club down the stretch here in these final 3 series. They've got 3 coming up with the Marlins. They've got the 3 with the Mets. On the other side of that, the Kansas City Royals, who have also been taking some lumps in September, but are a club that are, lined up to get into the postseason for the first time in a decade. So as you go down the stretch here, the Braves have got to handle their business against the Miami Marlins. We're not going to do a Dodgers show right here, but what Shohei Ohtani and the Dodgers did in clinching their playoff berth with a 20-3 just absolute demolition of the Marlins, in which Ohtani got to 50-50, drove in 10 runs, had 17 total bases, yada, yada, blah, blah, blah. I mean, the Braves have got to go in there and maybe do something that approaches at least what they were doing on Thursday, or at the whatever the case is as the shirt says, you can win ugly, but you can't lose pretty at this point for the Braves. There's no margin for error, I guess, to make a long story short.
There's not. And again, you've put yourself in this spot to where you're going to have to go to Miami now, a place where the Braves have played well and a team that, obviously is rebuilding. They traded off whatever assets that they had at the trade deadline. So it is a team that you should be able to go in there and win, but it's you have to. You can't come out of there with just a series win at this point. I feel like you have to go in there and sweep that series, and you're going in there with your 4th and your 5th starter and Morton and potentially Grant Holmes on Sunday in this matchup. So you're really going to have to be reliant on that offense to continue what they did in these last 2 games in Cincinnati. And to your point earlier, that's just not something we've seen them do consistently enough this year for me to have a lot of confidence in that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not too many days we get to talk up the offense the way that you can after a 15-3 just absolute wrecking crew performance. But it doesn't have to be at this level either. I think that's worth pointing out. It just needs to be consistent from this point forward. That's what you would take. And consistent means coming through when they have these opportunities, which is we've had to discuss way more times than we want to over the course of the year. It's almost like the worst thing you can do to the Braves is let them get runners at second and third with nobody out, because things just seem to crater from there. They might just hit better with the bases clear. I don't know, but they don't get the option. I mean, you want to pile up these hits and come through in the clutch, and the Braves were able to do a little bit of that in Game 2 against Cincinnati, and then they did a lot of slugging in Game 3 to pick up this series victory. We've got a lot more to talk about on this edition of the show. We'll get deeper into the Chris Sale start and, of course, the season that he's been having, because it is, I believe, the best in baseball and Cy Young worthy, to put it mildly, for him. Also, what the Braves have coming their way in Miami is the return of Ozzie Albies. We'll get into that as well as the Braves postcast continues. For most of us that like collecting cards, the idea of spending $2,000 or more on a high-priced Ellie De La Cruz rookie or Patrick Mahomes rookie, it's just not in the cards. I love collecting, but that's some serious money to drop on one card. But thanks to slab packs from arenaclub.com, it's now possible to score gem mints for a fraction of the retail price. And every card that I just listed was a hit from last week's Arena Club slab pack drop. Arena Club is the only repack that provides real value, a complete view of all the possible cards, and clear hit rates for each one. Arena Club slab packs are revolutionizing the repack game with transparency. After your pulls are revealed, they'll immediately be placed in your showroom for safekeeping, selling, trading, or auction. The Arena Club grading process is accurate, fast, and transparent, with a full grade rationale provided and an explanation on how your card was scored. I can tell you, as somebody who's graded a lot of cards recently, it would be nice to know exactly why they were graded, what they were graded in some cases. But whether you're buying, selling, trading, or displaying, Arena Club is the card collecting platform you have to check out. And right now, you can get 10% off your first slab pack or card purchase by going to arenaclub.com/lockedonmlb and using the code LockedOnMLB. That's arenaclub.com/LockedOnMLB, and the code is LockedOnMLB, all uppercase, for 10% off your first purchase. Let's get into the line score and box score of a game that will be very fun to talk about. And in fact, the first segment was one of the best that we have had all season long. I don't mind saying that, just based on the content that we have to cover in this one. Braves now 83-70 as they scored 15 times on 18 hits, no errors, and 6 men left on base for the Braves. The Reds dropped to 74-80, 3 runs, 10 hits, no errors, 9 men left aboard for them. Winner is Chris Sale. He's now 18-3. Aguilar takes the loss, drops to 2-1 for Cincinnati. Obviously, no save in a game that had a 12-run margin of victory, and nobody did the old 3-inning save for Atlanta to close it out. But putting all that aside, we want to talk about Chris Sale here for a moment. Then we're going to get into the offense again, because goodness knows, I don't know that we've scratched the surface on some of the individual performances and some of the history that was made in this game as well. But Chris Sale, 5 innings, 5 hits, 2 runs, both of them earned, a couple of walks, 6 strikeouts, and a home run. He has taken over the Triple Crown lead. Again, his 2.38 ERA is the best in baseball, as are the 18 wins, and he took back the strikeout crown. Chris Sale has made a case not only for his first career Cy Young, which is a crazy thing to think about when you go look at the seasons that he has had over the course of his career. But, Jake, as I said earlier, I think we're watching the best pitcher in baseball every time he takes the mound for the Braves.
Certainly feels that way. I know Tarek Skubal's obviously really good in the American League himself, and Zach Wheeler's a really good pitcher for the Phillies. But Chris Sale, what he has done and what he's meant to this team, I think you can certainly make a very good argument that he's been the best pitcher in baseball this year. And just the fact that he's gone out there every time, went deep into the game. I know today was a little bit on the shorter side for him, but most nights he's giving you 6-7 innings and he's giving you 2 earned or less. And so it's just, that is what makes, in my mind, a pitcher. And I talked about it with Schwellenbach and all these guys. Every time they go out there, they're going 5, 6, 7 innings and giving you 2, 3 earned or less and giving you a chance to win a ball game. And that's really all you can ask for, is just that consistency in your pitcher. But he's obviously doing it. Sale is doing it to a dominating level. Now, this wasn't one of his dominating performances. This was one that he had to grind through, and still he got 18 whiffs, which tells you a guy that really didn't have it. And he still got that many swings and misses. He got 5 of 10 on that changeup, a pitch that was working for him a little bit today. But the fastball velocity, I mean, you look at it and you can tell watching, it was down 2 miles per hour in this one. He talked about it after the game, nothing to be concerned about. It was just a hot day and it just didn't feel right for whatever reason. But it's there. You saw it in the last start. I mentioned it. The velocity was actually up against the Dodgers. So he's not worried about it. I'm not worried about it. Again, it was a hot day and a day game. All that kind of played into it. And still, it was 5 innings, 2 earned runs for Chris Sale.
Yeah, I mean, he pushed the velocity against the Dodgers up into the high 90s. I think it's there when he needs it. I just don't think this was a day where he felt like he really needed to push it. And the conditions, as you mentioned, it can be a little bit tougher on a pitcher earlier in the day. And obviously, with the heat, all of those things. I think Chris Sale has probably, over the course of his career, earned the latitude to pitch the way that he feels like he needs to. And if this is the results of having to work extra hard, I think most pitchers would take this every 5th day. But putting all of that aside, Braves bullpen able to close it out. Luke Jackson, John Brebbia, and Daysbel Hernandez allowed just 1 run combined between them over the final 4 innings. And they also struck out 8 batters to close this thing out. So a 14 strikeout day for the Braves. That, though, not the headline. 15 runs, that certainly was. Chris Sale, though, as I mentioned earlier, career best 18th win picked up thanks to a lot of that offense. I think if we're honest, it should already be 20. Just based on some of the games that he got no decisions in, even last month. And, of course, that 1-0 loss to the White Sox is going to stick in the craw of most people, including, I'm sure, Chris Sale. But, I mean, he's got 2 bigger starts coming, though, sitting on 18. I know this isn't all about Chris Sale getting to 20 wins, but if he does, it's probably going to mean that something is going right for the Braves. And typically when Chris Sale's on the mound, things have gone right for this club.
Yeah, if he gets to 20, that means they won a game against the Mets, which would be huge. And it means they won the last game of the season, which the Braves might need to get into the postseason. So, yeah, that would obviously be great. And it'd be 3 years in a row that a Brave starter has done it. And like you said, he deserves more than that. He's pitched well enough in many games to have more than the wins that he has, which is crazy because he already has 18 and just 3 losses on the season. Yeah. So incredible year for Chris Sale.
It may be more telling to look at the amount of losses that he has with being so small as opposed to just the number of wins and some that maybe he didn't get credit for that, you know, and we're not going to solve this on this edition of the Postcast, but it's wild that a starting pitcher can throw 6 innings of 1-run ball or 2-run ball. A reliever can come in for 1 out and get credit for a win, but you didn't pitch well enough as a starting pitcher to get credited with the win. I don't know. The whole thing is probably subjective at some point, but we don't get to make those rules. We weren't around 150 or 175 years ago or whenever the first baseball game was played. Putting that aside, the lineup delivered in this one 3-run homers, 4 of them, in fact, and that's going to do it on most days. And in fact, that's never happened on one day. According to the research from Elias Sports Bureau, that set a record, at least since 1900. Jake, no one had hit 4 3-run homers in the same game. I don't know about you, but I found that almost hard to believe.
Yeah, I did too. I would have thought last year's team did it 3 or 4 times with as many home runs as they hit. And it's good to see. I mean, you talked about it, and especially in the second half, the Braves have gotten their home runs, but nobody's been on base for them. And so maybe this was a little bit of that correcting itself in one game, but certainly glad to have some runners on for these home runs and have 6 home runs in a game. Again, not something we've seen a lot this year, something that was just normal Tuesday or Thursday, whatever, last year, something that they're able to get done today. So good to see that, but good to see those runners on base. And that's really what's plagued this Braves offense. Again, the power has been there. It's the on-base ability that this Braves team has really been lacking, not having anybody on for those home runs.
Now, we talked some about Matt Olson yesterday. We talked about Jorge Soler before that. Both those guys heating up. Michael Harris II, though, homered for the 3rd consecutive game, had 2 on the day, 6 home runs in his last 9 games, in which he's hitting .342 with 10 runs knocked in, 11 runs scored. When you just close your eyes and think, whose numbers do that sound like at the top of the Braves order? I think we all know who we might be thinking of. He doesn't have to be Ronald Acuna Jr., but those kind of numbers will definitely help ignite this Braves offense. And if you've got Marcell Ozuna starting to wake up again, maybe power up again, along with Soler, along with Olson, along with the return of Ozzy Albies and whatever else you can get from up and down this lineup, whether it's a Ramon Laureano like it was today, whether it's a Whit Merrifield, whoever it may be, a Gio Urshela that comes through with a clutch hit, you start to feel like this is an offense that could at least cobble together the runs you need for a pitching staff this good. And I would say that this is rather good timing to have several of these guys now we're talking about maybe swinging at the best that they have in a while.
Yeah, it's great to see the lineup start to lengthen a little bit. I mean, there's been so much pressure on Ozuna for the longest time. If he didn't get anything done, it felt like the offense couldn't do anything. Olson's picked it up here in the second half, but as we've talked about, it's really been those 2 guys. If they didn't have big nights, if they weren't able to hit a 2-run homer, then it just felt like the offense wasn't really going to be able to generate enough runs to win a ball game. But you get Harrison, Soler going. Laureano's been great. He just missed a home run the night before, and he gets a 3-run home run in this one, and he's just been fantastic. I think he just plays every day in left field right now. I think you absolutely have to. But it lengthens this lineup where it's just not so dependent on one or two guys getting it done. And that's what, again, I know we can't keep comparing things to 2023, but that's what a healthy lineup is able to do when you have guys up and down that can get it done. And it's not so dependent on, can Ozuna get this big hit here or not? And that's what, that's what we've seen the last, 2 games. We need to see it obviously further on, but getting those guys going is certainly huge, especially with Ozzie Albies coming back as well.
Yeah, looking up and down this lineup today, 3 hits, 4 runs knocked in, 4 runs scored for Michael Harris as well at the top of the order. Jorge Soler, 2 for 3, his 20th home run of the year, drove in 3 runs. Ozuna, 1 for 4, knocked in a run. Matt Olson, 2 hits and 4 trips, 4 runs batted in. That gets him up to 90 on the year. I don't know if I need to tell you at the All-Star break, I believe that he was on track for something like 21 or 22 homers and about 70 or 75 RBI. It was not looking like this, and that July was one of the most forgettable months over the course of his entire career. He has turned the corner over the last 6 or 7 weeks now. 2 more hits for Ramon Laureano, 2 for Whit Merrifield, a couple of hits for Gio Urshela as well. Orlando Arcia picked up a hit at the bottom of the order. Even Kevin Biggio with a hit and a run scored in this one. I believe his first hit in a Braves uniform, if I'm not mistaken. But if I am, then I apologize. There haven't been very many, and he hasn't gotten very many opportunities in his time with the Braves, as brief as it has been. It all added up to 15 runs on 18 hits, and that, as they say, will get it done on most days. It certainly did for the Braves today. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit about the wild card, of course, get you set up for the weekend and the series against the New York Mets that will follow, and discuss the return of Ozzie Albies, what it means for the Braves lineup, because it's happening on Friday. That comes your way next on the Braves Postcast. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, and we have something a little bit different for you today. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a free 3-week trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook today. Well, the wild card is going to be, I think, wild right on down to the final games of the season, just based on how everything is designed, at least on the National League side. I'm sure there's plenty of stuff going on in the AL, but we're not covering that today because if you look at where the Braves are, they're waiting to get to the New York Mets and hoping to get there within shouting distance and with some ability to at least attempt to control their own fate when it comes to punching their ticket to the postseason. After beating the Reds, the Mets and Phillies open up their 4-game series. Those games, or that game on Thursday night, not complete as we record this, but we know that the Braves are going to need some help from the Philadelphia Phillies. So as weird as it sounds, Jake, a few Braves fans might want to figure out a way to cheer for the Phillies for, about 96 hours.
Yeah, you're going to have to, as bad as it feels. But right now, the Mets up 9-6 in the 7th inning of that game. So looks like they might go on to win that one. But either way, as we've talked about, for me at least, I think you got to pick up at least one game this weekend and go into that mid-series back one game. That way, if you do win the series, then you own that tiebreaker. And obviously, you feel a little better in those last 3 games of the season, which will obviously still be pretty big for the Braves. But you can't fall further back. You fall further back and you put yourself in a situation where you got to sweep a Mets team who has the best record in baseball since the end of July or something like that. That obviously puts you in a really tough spot. So again, you got to win every game this weekend. You got to hope the Phillies can help you out a little bit, at least win 1, if not 2 of those games, and give the Braves a chance to make up some ground headed into that series.
Yeah, the San Diego Padres, as of this recording, 2.5 games ahead of both the Diamondbacks and the Mets with the top wild card spot. Then Arizona and New York are tied. Braves a game and a half back, but it looks like for the Mets, they're going to take it to Philly in this series, and I wouldn't be surprised if they do, just based on how well they've been playing. And the Diamondbacks were leading late against the Brewers in their game, so you can't count on help from somewhere else. You're just going to have to handle your business day to day, and I think Brian Snitker has made a pretty good point of saying that time and time again about we've just got to come in and win a baseball game and then come in tomorrow and win another one and so on and so forth. Ozzie Albies comes back on Friday against the Marlins as the Braves open up that 3-game weekend series. What will it mean for the rest of the infield? We know the obvious. Ozzie Albies will be playing second base for the Braves. What does it mean for Whit Merrifield, for Gio Urshela, perhaps for Orlando Arcia? We talked a little bit about it yesterday, but Jake, I find this to be one of the discussions we haven't had a lot, which is all of a sudden the Braves have a couple of options to do things a couple of different ways and aren't being forced into just trying to figure something out. Ozzie Albies coming back, I think, is a net positive. He was 4 for 8 on his minor league rehab assignment. Looks like he can swing the bat at least from the right side. It's good to get him back in there.
It is. And like we talked about earlier, it just lengthens this lineup. Even putting that name back in there and the threat that he has, suddenly you're looking at a Harris, Soler, Ozuna, Olsen, Ozzie, either Darno or Murphy and Laureano in there. And suddenly you're looking at a lineup that's, 6-7 deep, and you feel pretty good about it, which is why I choose to go for the defense. And I would stick with Gio Urshela at third base, where he's been really good defensively, and he's had a couple of good games at the plate. Mm-hmm. And I'd stick with RC at shortstop. I know a lot of fans are very frustrated with his at-bats right now, and rightfully so, but he is your best defender at that position, which is a very important position on the infield. So that's how I would line it up. But obviously, Witt, very good player, and he has brought a lot to this team. And I think he'll still be used in some capacity, even if he is coming off the bench. But that's probably how I would put it together.
I'll throw this in there as well. It may not be a matter of, one guy's just going to the bench for the final 9 games. There might just be some mix and match. And at this point, maybe you actually have the opportunity to, hey, pinch hit for this guy because we can move somebody else over there. And then this guy can come in and play that position. And you're not talking about, remember when Eli White played in the this position in the minor leagues, or when he first came up to the big leagues years and years ago? Let's throw him out there. It's not starting your emergency catcher or something crazy like that. It's an actual infielder who you could feel confident about putting into the game. It gives you those options as things go on, and that could be something worth considering as well. If they want to do some mixing and matching, they actually have the pieces to mix and match at least a little bit. Now, if Cincinnati was a tougher task, which I can assure you they were, then the Braves need to make short work of the Marlins. They need a sweep in this series. It doesn't have to be 15-3. It doesn't have to be 20 runs like the Dodgers just dropped on them. It just needs to be 3 wins and get the hell out of town.
Yeah, I mean, that's the goal, and that's what has to happen. I mean, you need to go in there and get 3 wins against a Marlins team that obviously it's a AAA team out there. I mean, that's what they're putting on the field right now, and you need to go out there and play like you are the far superior team. Play with some confidence, but don't underestimate your opponent either, that is going to want to come in there and try to ruin your season. That's exactly what the Marlins have a chance of doing. So go in there and take care of business just like you did in these last 2 games. And I think you also have to treat these like postseason games. If Morton is in the 4th or 5th inning, whatever, and he all of a sudden is just losing it, like what happens sometimes with him, you got to get a guy up and ready to go. I think you have to treat these like postseason games the rest of the way. Every game has to be treated like you must win this game.
Now, they certainly are going to be, I'm sure, at the start of next week against the Mets and against the Kansas City Royals. Hopefully, the Braves will be able to handle their business the best way they can and not get into that situation with the Marlins, because you would love to, if there was one last opportunity to kind of have guys rested up and ready for the showdown, not have to break that glass in case of emergency every single night leading up to that Mets series. So to your point, it's important that the Braves take care of their business and they do it the way that they should against a team that they have more firepower than, better pitching than, and should be able to take this series and hopefully take all 3 of those games, because you need every single win at this point. With that in mind, Charlie Morton has pitched well lately, past 7 starts, 2.68 ERA. He's averaging just under 6 innings per start, 49 strikeouts and 40 1/3 innings over that 7-game stretch, Jake. Only 3 home runs allowed. So as we've talked about with Charlie Morton, he still gets a ton of swing and miss at age 40. If he can keep the ball in the park and control those walks and those free base runners, avoid the big inning, he's still been giving the Braves some pretty good work, even as the old gunslinger and maybe even now the de facto 5th starter.
Yeah, I think you hit it right there when you said avoid the big inning. And I'm being kind of harsh on Charlie on this podcast, but it's just because we see it sometimes. And even in these good starts where it feels like there's an inning or 2 where he just all of a sudden loses command, he hits a batter. And in the past, those are times where we've seen things unravel and he can give up a big inning. So it's just knowing when those come, being able to bear down and get out of it, limit the damage, and not, put your team out of the game. So that's what you're hoping for with Charlie Morton. He's done a great job of it lately. Braves are going to need him to step up and do it again.
Yeah, they definitely will. Charlie Morton on the year is 8-8. His ERA is just over 4. Valente Milazzo is going to get the start for the Miami Marlins. He's 2-4 with a 3.70 on the season. Battle of right-handers as the Braves and Marlins meet at 7:10 p.m. Eastern time on Friday night down at whatever they're calling Marlins Park at this point. So that will wrap us up for this edition of the Braves Postcast. Atlanta taking a big win over the Cincinnati Reds to close out that series. And now it's on to Miami. Ozzie Albies coming back, and the Braves looking for a sweep as they get set up for that encounter with the New York Mets that will start next week at Truist Park. As always, make sure you subscribe to Locked On Sports Atlanta on YouTube and leave us those likes and comments. Share the show with a friend and subscribe to Locked On Braves wherever you get your podcast. For Jake Mastroianni, I'm Grant McAuley. We will catch you next time here on the Braves Postcast. And until then, so long, everyone.